All right, man. Ooh, you're not going quite fast enough. All right, this is another Viva on the Street update. You all thought that the Viva on the Street updates were done. They're not done. They're just getting started, it would seem, because this is going to be a longer, slow burn of a Viva on the Street. Curfew's over. I don't know what time it is now, but there's no curfew anymore. But that doesn't mean that the madness, the absolute unscientific, enraging madness has ended. And it is enraging. And it's enraging in a way that I can't hide. It's enraging. And when I get a little enraged, my thoughts become even more, call them hyperactive or scattershot than normal, but I'm going to focus them nonetheless. And when I get enraged, I want to swear, but I'm not going to swear because I do know that I have a young audience watching this, absorbing the information, absorbing the knowledge, absorbing the philosophy, and I'm not going to taint it by swearing, but just know whenever I say words like gosh darn or fiddle-dee-dee or whatever Ned Flanders says, I'm thinking of swearing. I'm just not doing it because I want the message to get through untainted. Updates. Let's start with Quebec. So we had a 30-plus degree day today, Celsius, fairly certain. I'm not 100% on the conversions, but it was over 30 degrees Celsius. It was fairly hot. Whether or not it's a heat wave, I don't care. That is a label without a meaning. It's hot. And it's hot, and the kids are still required to wear face masks. At the very least, we're going to get to this, until today, in schools. And in some schools, they were apparently requiring the children to wear face masks, even when they were on recess outdoors. Whether or not it's the fault of any particular school or the fault of the confusion, the absolute lack of clarity on the implementation and enforcement and rules themselves, who knows? But that's what it was. Schools don't know what to implement by way of application of these fiddle-dee-dee, willy-nilly rules that they've been imposing. So in some schools, on a 30-degree plus day outdoors, children have been required to wear face masks, even outdoors. By all accounts, even indoors at all schools, they have been required to wear face masks, to the point where some schools were clamoring for the government to allow them to use fans. I swear to you, fiddle-dee-dee, they were actually, the issue was whether or not they could use fans in schools that apparently did not have air conditioning, because it's 2021 in Canada, and this is not a first world problem, this is just a problem. Schools did not have air conditioning. Public schools do not have air conditioning. And so the question was, can they use fans to cool down the children while they are compelled, if he's eating poop, we're going to have a problem, while they are compelled to wear face masks indoors in sweltering heat. And the government's response, because the government is just so scientific and based in hard evidence, the argument was that they can't have fans because the concern is that it might blow around infectious particles in schools in Quebec. In Quebec, I couldn't find what the current active case count is in the province, which is convenient because all they do is continue to count the confirmed cases through the life of COVID and not actually just tell us how many confirmed cases there are in the province. But what we do know is confirmed hospitalizations, a few hundred. Confirmed ICUs, under 100 in a province of 8.5 million. So in a province of 8.5 million, where, as far as anyone knows by the science, transmission has been minimal in schools. In a province of 8.5 million, we have maybe hundreds of confirmed cases and a few hundred hospitalizations and even under 100 ICUs. And the concern as to why they can't use fans in high schools and schools is because they might blow around particulate infectious particles in school. And I'm no doctor, I'm no scientist. Consult your doctor and scientist if you have any questions about medicine and science. My impression is that if you are in a sweltering, stifling classroom with someone who might happen to be infected, one of the few, if not the infinitesimally few people in the province who happen to be infected and happen to be at school and happen to be in a room, if that's the case and you have no fans circulating, I don't think it makes much of a difference. I don't know, though. I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I'm going to go out and venture a hard wager that being locked in a closed classroom with someone who happens to be infected, it won't make a difference if you have a fan dispersing the infected air particles. But that is science coming out of the government. And speaking of science coming out of the government, let's just fly a little west, shall we, to Alberta and Jason Kenney. And I'm going to go this way. I'm going this way because there's too much wind down here. It can't even be called hypocrisy. It can only be called fiddle-dee-dee nonsense. You have Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, who Alberta is now, has the title of being one of the few places on earth where they are locking up pastors in jail because they're breaking public health orders. They lock up a pastor in jail for breaking public health orders, and then what happens on June 1st? The Premier of Ontario goes to an 11th floor terrace. I think it's called the Sky something or other. It's called Patio Gate if you just Google it. The Premier of Ontario goes out with his government buddies for a business dinner in which they order a 40-ounce bottle of Jamison, a bottle of wine, some San Pellegrino, and they are sitting on a terrace on a rooftop. Government officials chugging 40 ounces of hard liquor, wine, carbon, the best, because nothing's too good for them because they have a hard job, they have a tough life, they have a stressful existence. They need to relax, like Lori Lightfoot said coming out of Chicago. They need their release. They're doing this while they are locking up pastors. Artur Pawlowski, James Coates, another one whose name I forgot right now, and it's not out of disrespect, I just can't remember it. While they are going after Ty Northcott, a world-renowned might not be the word, but a legend rodeo rider. While they're going after him for contempt of court, and a video I did on this last week, they went after Ty Northcott for being in contempt of court of a court order to a legal proceeding to which he was not a party. And the original injunction that came out of that court order, apparently by accident or by design, applied to all of the citizens of Alberta, enjoining them not to break the law, enjoining them to respect public health orders. The order was subsequently corrected to apply only to the parties of the lawsuit, as is typical in law. You can't enjoin people to respect a court order in a lawsuit to which they are not a party, exceptions aside. We don't need to get into those right now. What ended up happening? They dropped the contempt proceedings against Ty Northcott, his wife, and his company, but they got an injunction enjoining Ty Northcott from holding a planned rally that he was planning to hold to protest against Jason Kenney. It was called the No More Jason Kenney Rally or something. So they got an injunction from court enjoining them not to hold the rally, which they undertook to adhere to. At the same time, Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, the same guy, incidentally, who a few years ago was tweeting about the beauty of seeing a human shield around a church that communist China was trying to destroy, praising them, lauding them. The same Jason Kenney who was praising them 3 years ago, now locking up pastors. Thank you very much. That actually is very nice. The same Jason Kenney who was praising human shields around churches 3 years later is now locking up pastors. How's it going? Oh, no, he can do it. He can do it. Don't worry. He's a good dog. I'm going to focus to the sky so we don't see any kids in this. He's a good dog. The same Jason Kenney who did that 3 years ago is now, while locking down and suffocating Albertans, while punishing his own population, while restricting their civil rights and freedoms, the most basic, mobility, enjoyment of property, peaceful assembly, religion. While he's doing this, he's sitting on a rooftop terrace with his government buddies, chugging down 40 ounces of Jamison, fine wine, and San Pellegrino. And then he comes out with an apology after all of this and says he thought he was doing something good by having this meeting in such a public fashion.
I regret that. I regret that the perception this has created. Quite frankly, when somebody said, "Are you sure you should be doing this? This is in public view," my response was, "Yes, we're allowed to follow the rules." And I thought, if anything, it's a positive thing to show the openness at phase 1 of the Open for Summer plan with the social gatherings of up to 10 people. But it is clear that some of us were not distanced the whole night, and I have to take responsibility for that.
Bull garbage, bullcorn, fiddle-dee-dee. He did not think anyone would see him on an 11th story terrace on a, I don't know, it's not a skyscraper at 11 stories, but he did not think anyone would see that meeting. And for him to come on after and say, I did it in a public fashion because I thought that would be more transparent, is, I don't often argue intentions, I just argue logic. And that's not logical. You want to do something transparently, you don't do it on a rooftop terrace of an 11-story skyscraper. You do it publicly where people can see you. And but for that image that released, no one would know about it. But he apologized for it. And this is what we have in our province and in our country. And it's an absolute outrage. And the fact that the government, turns that ship quickly once they get caught themselves heading in the wrong direction does not make it right. Oh, and incidentally, in Quebec, we'll see what happens tomorrow. I like to pretend that my angry tweets on Twitter actually have an impact. I know they don't. It's an outlet. It's a diary. It's something that in 10 years from now, I'll be able to see whether or not I was right, wrong, whether or not I was totally out there, or whether or not I had some sense of reason to me. But I'll be able to see. I know that when I put out a tweet, it doesn't go anywhere, and I don't delete them unless they have a typo. But we're going to see as of tomorrow, and I like to think my tweets had an impact. No more face masks in class in schools in Quebec. All it takes is absolute outrage from concerned parents. All it takes is an absolute tsunami of common sense tweets, social media pressure on these politicians to say, yeah, you know what? Maybe the infected particulate matter being blown around by fans in the class, maybe that's not exactly the most legitimate concern to have right now. I don't need to be a doctor or a scientist to know that. I can be a lawyer with half a brain and critically analyze the situation to know that that's illogical. That is untenable. And any politician who thinks that that's justifiable or tenable has a problem. A fiddle-dee-dee of a problem. So as of tomorrow, no more face masks required in class. Small blessings, I guess. This is what's going on in the world. We have... Don't you do that. Don't you do that. He ate something, by the way, earlier today, so foul-smelling, it could not have been poop. I don't know what it was, but I pulled it out of his mouth. I did not look back until I got to a bathroom where I washed my hands thoroughly and disinfected them with rubbing alcohol. That's where we're at. It's a long rant. I'm sorry. But this has to come to an end at some point. This deference to government arbitrariness, it's not a sign of benevolence. It's not a sign of good citizenship. What it is a sign of is people shutting off their collective minds because they prefer to have a government tell them what they can and cannot do, as opposed to actively decide what they should and should not do on their own. Viva on the street. Check it out. Thank you all. You know where to find me. Viva Fry. You can support us on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Wherever. That's not what this is about. This is about just stopping to think and putting pressure where pressure is due, and appreciating that the government is not your parent, and any government that tells you to isolate your children in a room for 2 weeks because they cross paths with someone who might have been COVID positive, they're not your parent. If they are your parent, it's a bad parent, that's an abusive parent, and there is no way in God's green earth that anyone should follow that advice, and anyone who gives you that advice is immediately discredited from ever giving you advice again in the future. All right, and that's what elections are for. We'll see what the next elections hold. What do you say? You have never gotten so much exercise in your life. Stay strong, stay optimistic, stay active. Elections are coming. Don't resign to that idea that elections don't matter. They matter, and if they don't matter, that is the time you make an active decision as to where you take your dollar, your vote, and your person, and your future. Peace.